So, up until this point, I've introduced a heap of concepts that are critical to the discourse around continuous improvement and quality. And I just want to just stop and unpack those and just sort of flag them and tick them off as we go through. So, the first one that I've been talking quite a bit about is systems management. And this is a critical concept in continuous improvement. It's the idea that recognizing that both at an organizational and at an individual level, the work that we do is really about process. It's about making sure that we can identify that it's all connected and it's all connected by a series of different components. And there's a relationship between those components. And there's usually an order in those components. So that if we think about the way that we undertake a task, it might be about we regularly are required to provide a brief to our boss. We have a process by which we do that, and that is about clarifying what the brief is, about sourcing the template, about doing our research, about drafting, about confirming, about finalizing, and so forth. So we have a process that we follow, and that can be a structured process that the organization has recognized and said, look, for the benefit of quality and getting consistency, producing consistent work, this is how we like it to occur. It can also be at a more macro organizational level where we think about what the organization does in terms of a system, which includes these nodes that work in order or in a particular sequence or flow in a particular way. So we can define a system as a group of independent but interrelated elements, which are unified as a whole. So it all works together to be able to produce what it is that either the organization is producing to a standard which is consistent, or at a micro level, it all works together so that we can produce a quality outcome that is consistent and with the expectations of key stakeholders around us. So continuous improvement requires this systems thinking. The other concept I'd like to talk about is the SIPOC or the SIPOC, depending on where your pronunciation is embedded. The SIPOC model is about understanding process from a number of dimensions. And if you look at a lot of the industry literature, it's usually SIP 01C. But in the resources that we've got, it covers off the double C model, which is not as common, but it's really important as well because it adds a different element to which I'll talk through shortly. But the SIPOC model gets us to think about process through these dimensions, through supplier dimension. So who are the suppliers in this process? Are they internal, external? Gets us to think about process in terms of inputs. What are the things that come into producing what we do produce? What are the inputs into that? Gets us to think about the doing, the process component of it. So, the steps that we take, and that can be around, is there literature around this? Is there a standard protocol? And then it gets us to think about the outputs, the things that are being produced as a result. Then constraints, things that can be stopping or hindering what we're doing in the process. And then customer outcomes. So who's receiving what? Again, are they internal, external, or intermediate? So you can look at this diagram here, which is the single C model. And here you can see this is for making pizza. So if we look at the process of making pizza through the SIPOC model, we can think about suppliers as in terms of, where do we get our supplies from? And then I can also then start to think of it more from a sustainability perspective. Are they ethical suppliers? Are they local? Are they contributing to the local economy? And so forth and so forth. So you can identify the suppliers. And then we can start to get critical about that. Is there the consistency of service, irregularity, all those things up to our quality standards? The product that they supply to us, are they up to our quality standards? Then we can think about the inputs. So that feeds into things like, from our suppliers, we can make things like dough or sauce or, the salami or pepperoni or the cheese or the peppers. And then we can think about the process. What are the steps that we go through in producing the pizza itself, the actual work that's been done, where we mix it all together, and that might be about preparing the dough, the sauce, the toppings, the cheese, baking it, and then removing it, slicing it up, putting it in the package, and then the outputs. What are the outputs that we produce from this? Are they whole pizzas that we then sell as a whole pizza, or are they slices that we then sell as slices? And then from the customer's perspective, who are the customers and how do they receive these? Does it dine in or take away or home delivery or whatever any other versions are? So you can see the SIPOC model, or this concept. So the idea of thinking about systems approach, but then thinking about breaking down that process which is embedded within our systems. Then this leads us on to this idea of process mapping, which I've been alluding to, this idea of being able to articulate how that process works. And this is really critical. If I talk about being analytical and about evidence-based, this is critical to that concept. If we're going to be analytical about how we do something so that we can identify opportunities for improvement, we need to understand how that something works. So that is about mapping it out. What are the different steps? What are the relationship between those steps? Who's responsible for those steps? Can we change those steps? We can't do this until we can articulate what those steps are. So that's this idea of mapping it out. So it's about understanding and modeling the different steps in the things that we do and identifying the relationship between those steps. It's based on gathering evidence, talking to our team, and finding out what is it that we're doing. Because often with process mapping, you've got two angles. You've got what we should be doing. So this is what the organization or the industry says is the process that we should be following. But then that could be quite different to what it is that we're actually doing. So sometimes when you're mapping it out, you might go, okay, this is the theory, this is how we should be doing it, but I'm just going to go and talk to the team. Okay, folks, can you share with me, what are the different steps that we undertake when doing this? So Tony, you're providing this brief on a regular basis. Can you just share with me the steps that you take? And then you can compare that to the ideal. Say, is what we're doing comparable with what we should be doing? And then that helps us, once we map it out, once we have it illustrated, such as the one on the slide here, it helps you then to become more analytical. How long do these steps take? Are they necessary? Are there those constraints? Who is the recipient of this step, and so forth? So we can really start to become critical around the process itself. And with this particular diagram here, you can see how we can even break it up into functional areas. So you can see who's responsible for what. So this part of the top part of the process, HR is responsible for. The bottom part of the process, the operational or functional team is responsible for. So you can then even add that layer of analysis to the process itself. So the fourth concept is fact-based decision making. This idea that, and I've already spoken about this, but just to clarify, this idea that we can be guided by our gut feeling. So, we can have opinions and they can sort of guide us in a direction, but when we're making decisions or we're taking action, we should be able to, we need to be able to substantiate and validate that through information and data. So you may not have any evidence that customers or end users are not happy or not as happy as they should be. And that might be your opinion or your gut feeling or instinct. So then, rather than making decisions just on that gut feeling or that instinct, you should then think about, what data do I need to be able to validate that? Well, I need to get some actual customer satisfaction data. So how can I get that? Let's do some surveys. Let's do some calls, speak directly to them, and let's have a criteria we can ask them against. And by doing that, let's get some information and some data that we can use as evidence to make a fact-based decision. And Therefore, that's going to be far more accurate than um, if I just act on my opinion or gut feeling. So data is critical within continuous improvement. The idea of, you know, statistics play a vital part in our decision making because it is continuous improvement should be an analytical process where we identify an opportunity for improvement. We think about what is it that that our quality should be. We then get evidence to support that. What are industry standards? What are our customers' expectations? We then analyze what we're currently doing and we gather the data on that by talking to our people, by having a look at some of the statistics coming out of our current process. We then look for opportunities for improvement. We plan how we're going to we identify what we're going to do as a change. We plan it, we implement that change, and then we gather that data to see if the improvement actually occurred. And based on that data, we're going to make a decision on whether we're going to do it or not. And that's the basis of the Plan, Do, Check, Act, which I'll talk more about as we go through. And as I was talking about earlier, teamwork, team cohesion, or a team performing at a high level is critical to good continuous improvement. You know, making sure that the team feels like they own the work, making sure that they feel they have ownership around what they're doing. This is going to be critical to improving the quality that we do, improving productivity, which leads to continuous improvement. So being able to have that concept where the team understands what is it that the organization is trying to do, what is it that I'm trying to do within that and to support what the organization is trying to do, and then how do I coordinate my work with those people around me to be able to do it. And that coordination might be around communication, consultation, engagement, and so forth. And if we can get that level of teamwork, we're going to see a greater improvement in the level of information that is being exchanged. And of course, if we talk about being evidence-based and about fact-based driven, well, information is critical to that. It plays an important part in that knowledge economy that occurs within an organization. And I've talked about the systems-based thinking. I've talked about process within that, and then I talked about the quality within each of those points of the process, and I talked about those as standards. So we know this is how we need to undertake this task, and that's going to drive consistency. And at each of those points, the quality standards need to be met. And the standards can be set by, if it's in a project context, project management, you'll have deliverables or you'll have targets. If it's in a business as usual context, it'll be policies and procedures. They'll be hopefully informed by things like industry standards or industry codes of practice. There's also considerations around enterprise and industrial agreements that feed into that. And of course, the legislative and regulatory framework. So we've got legislation such as acts and regulations, but we've got also things like industry, international and Australian standards. And then of course, standards can be driven by our customers or our end users or our investors, their expectations around what we should be doing and what we should be delivering on a consistent basis. And of course, we can't talk about continuous improvement and this idea of continuously being better at what we do without thinking about the concept of change management, the idea that change needs to be managed well, not only in terms of the process, but also the people. So, continuous improvement necessitates change. It is an enhancement to what we're doing, and that requires us to modify our behavior and modify the way that we do things. And that, of course, creates change. So, and change can be a different experience to different people. So to one person, it can be very exciting and a terrific motivating challenge. To someone else, it can be really quite terrifying and paralyzing. So as a leader, it's our responsibility to be able to manage that. Here is the ADKAR model, which is about awareness, making sure that you can identify the need for change, the desire, making sure that you get people connected and understanding the importance, getting their support for the change, making sure that you've provide the knowledge, which is the information required. So things like what is required of me now, how do I do this new task, and so forth. Provide the training so that people can improve on their ability to do the task. And then the reinforcement, that positive reinforcement, the encouragement when uh, when people do the right thing in terms of the new change, but also the reinforcement of change management if they go back to old ways, going back and providing more encouragement to go back to the new, supporting the skill development and so forth. So when we think about this change management process, it's really about focusing on small number of critical activities, really breaking down the big change into small manageable change so it's not so overwhelming. It's about thinking of the sequence of activities within the change itself and setting it up so that we've got success at the start. If we can have early success, it sends a positive message and it reinforces. It's a great positive reinforcement. Making sure that we prioritize the actions so that we know the logical order and sequence of activities so that it flows in a way that will improve its success. Making sure that as a leader that we're facilitating the change. That is, that we're communicating the process, that everybody understands what they have to do, but we're also managing and supporting those individuals and relationships within that. So if the change is creating a challenge between individuals, that we can get in there and help to build that relationship, deal with any misunderstandings, any help to facilitate any conflict, help to facilitate cohesion. It's also about looking at ways that we can protect changes as they occur, because as I alluded to before, one of the main challenges around change management is that you can implement the change, but if you don't have the right mechanisms in place, individuals can go back to the old way just because it's far more comforting. Been doing it for a long time and I'm very comfortable with that. So it's also about putting mechanisms in place to protect the changes as they occur so that they don't slip back to the old way. And that is about things such as reducing forces that stop people from going to the new way. An example of that, of what I'm talking about, is if we don't have adequate training and people aren't confident with using this new system, that would be a force that stops people from shifting to the new. So we would think about, how do we reduce that force, that fear of engaging with the new system? Well, the best way to do that is by providing training. And if we can provide training in an environment that is supported and confidence building, that's going to reduce that resisting force. It's also about thinking about removing things. So, for example, there might be still things around tools or techniques or equipment that we used to use in the past. The new process doesn't require them, but we still leave them lying around. So sometimes it's just about removing those, and that's reducing a resisting force of going back to the old way. So it can be, both forward-looking and back-looking, and building up those positive forces, while reducing. So whilst we're reducing those resisting forces, we think about what can encourage people to keep dragging them to the new. So things like positive reinforcement, positive feedback. In some cases, can be incentives like bonuses or morning teas or things like that can really build and encourage people to move towards the new.